Hello, and welcome back to the World of Wysteria. Tonight, I will be reading Chapter 14. Wysteria, Chapter 14. When Will returned to Wysteria the next night, his first impulse was to go to the square and check the time on the clock tower. To his surprise, the hands on the face indicated that it was 11:30. In the morning, he assumed, since the sun shone high in the sky. And checking his watch, he found it agreed. Apparently, there was no need for him to set the time today. His world seemed to be turning on its own. Will then went in search of Emily, for he knew she was already here. Not because he smelled lilacs, though. He just knew. And he felt and followed an urge to walk in the direction of the garden. Coming to the entrance, he crossed the terrace, descended the stone steps, and continued walking, now feeling drawn toward the castle. He passed through the garden and entered the forest beyond it, following the sound of the waterfall, whose call he could hear in the distance. Soon, Will came to the edge of the woods and stepped into the clearing in front of his castle, where he found Emily, standing with her back to him near the edge of the deep gorge on the opposite side of the grounds. She stared down at the river that raged below, obviously lost in thought and oblivious to his presence. For a moment, Will considered sneaking up on her. If he were stealthy, the sound of the nearby falls would help mask his approach. However, giving it more thought, he decided it might not be safe to startle her, since she stood so close to the precipitous drop. "Emily!" he yelled, loud enough to be heard over the watery clamor. She turned, smiled and waved, looking pleased but not surprised to see him. I knew you'd find me," she shouted back. "Were you trying to hide from me?" he asked, after hurrying across the grounds to join her. Emily laughed. "Not really," she said. "I suppose it was a test, but a test I was confident you'd pass." "Did you know I had arrived and that I was coming?" "No, not in the way that you knew I was here. I just had faith you'd know where to find me." "And you did," she said, giving him a playful peck on the lips. "I was going to sneak up and surprise you," said Will, returning her kiss. "But I was afraid it might spook you and make you fall." "Well, thank you for that," she said, laughing. "What were you looking at?" he asked, peering over the edge of the ravine. "Just the water," she said, "the way it moves. It's mesmerizing." "What would happen?" he murmured, wondering out loud. "What's that?" she asked. "What would happen if we jumped?" he said. "Well, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't die," she answered, "but our dream bodies would get hurt if we actually hit the bottom. We'd probably wake up before that, though. Our automatic defense mechanism would kick in." "Yes," said Emily, "that's what usually happens." "But we wouldn't be able to fly?" "No," she said. "At least I couldn't. You might be able to, though." "Why do you say that?" he asked. "Because it's your world," she replied. "You can do things here that visitors can't. And in general, builders tend to have an easier time altering their bodies." "Altering their bodies," he said. "You mean give themselves wings? Maybe, she said with a laugh. But no, that's not what I mean. There are dreamers, like Jeremy, who can alter their bodies. Not necessarily their shape, but their internal structure. Though I've never seen him fly, I wouldn't be surprised if he could, even here. Now, of course, she continued, you could change your world in such a way that anyone could fly. Really? Said Will. How? Well, for instance, you could make the air much thicker, or the gravity much weaker, she said. In a world like that, I might not be able to fly, but I certainly wouldn't fall as fast. You don't just create the things here, you create the environment in which they exist. You also create the rules that govern how things interact with each other. And your world is modeled on the one you're most familiar with, the waking world. That's natural, of course. Most worlds work that way. But they don't have to. Will's mind began spawning questions as it absorbed what she'd said. Do there have to be rules of some kind, he asked. I assume things can't behave in a totally random way. Emily thought over his question, then replied, your world has to make sense to you in some way or another. It's always a reflection of your mind, or your soul, or whatever you call the source of creation. Worlds are like pieces of art. Some may be remarkably realistic, some may be very abstract, but they all represent the artist's intent, the artist's vision. Even in the seeming madness of Van Gogh or Dali or Escher, there is some kind of method. Just imagine the worlds their minds might create if they were dreamers. Will was struck by her analogy. It managed to untangle and answer many of the muddled questions that stirred in his head. So that's what you meant yesterday when you warned me about limiting myself, he said, sitting down on the grass. Yes, she replied, but warned is probably too strong a word. Wysteria is a wonderful creation. I wasn't implying that you should do anything differently. I just wanted you to be aware of the power you have here. I really wish you could travel with me, she said, taking a seat on the ground by him. I'd love to show you some of the strange worlds I've been to. Then you'd understand. So, there's no way you could drag me with you? He asked. No, I don't think so, she answered. Because I'm not a traveler? Yes, in part, she said. Your connection to your world is too strong. I doubt I could pull you away, even if you were a willing passenger. We each have our blessings and our curses, I suppose. You can create a paradise, but you're chained there and can never leave it. I am unfettered and can travel to any world in the universe, but I'll never have a world of my own, a home. And it's never possible to have the best of both worlds, so to speak, Will asked her. I wouldn't want to say it's impossible, she said. I've heard stories, rumors, about dual dreamers, mortal dreamers who can build and travel. But I don't see how a person can have their cake and eat it too. But you told me that Jeremy can travel, he said. I said mortal dreamers, she reminded him. Jeremy is an immortal. And he's not really a dreamer anymore. He doesn't go back and forth between the realm of dreams and the waking world. And when there's no waking world to go back to, it's no longer a dream. Is he actually immortal? He asked. Deathless? In truth, I don't know, Emily replied. What about Nathan? Said Will. Is he an immortal? Yes, unfortunately, she said with a contemptuous laugh. But he's a relative newcomer and doesn't have the power that Jeremy has. I don't believe he can travel, and hopefully he'll never acquire that skill. That's one reason he needs his troop of minions. It's the only way he can reach out beyond his world. His henchmen serve him, giving him information and doing dirty deeds. Through them, Nathan can stay in touch with the rest of the dream universe, as well as the waking world. And what do the minions get out of it? He asked. They can have their wildest fantasies fulfilled, she said. Nathan can give them whatever perverted pleasure they want, whenever they want it. Many worlds operate under that system. A Lord Creator with traveling vassals. It's a convenient arrangement for both sides. Does Jeremy have vassals? No, said Emily, not really. Certainly not in any organized sense. He has friends, people like me who visit him, who want to learn things. In exchange, we might do small favors for him. But unlike Nathan, Jeremy can leave his world. He's not shut off from the rest of the dream universe. Though I don't believe he can make direct contact with the waking world. Jeremy isn't just older and more powerful than Nathan. He's a different kind of person. Nathan and his followers are drawn to earthly pleasures, sinful pleasures, you might say. His minions are like drug addicts, dependent on him for their nightly fix of depravity. Jeremy's interests are more sublime. He enjoys his isolation because he's comfortable with himself. He doesn't need adulation or approval from others. People like Nathan, evil people, if you will, need to be surrounded by followers who flatter them, who validate their grandiose opinions they have of themselves. And they enjoy having control over others because it makes them feel powerful. I don't believe that evil people, no matter how much wealth or power they have, or no matter which universe they inhabit, can ever be happy. They don't love themselves. How could they? On the surface, they may appear to be having fun, but it's an illusion. Deep inside, at the very best, they can only feel emptiness. So they seek distractions, ways to hide from their own souls. It's sad, really, she concluded, and I'd only feel pity for them if they just keep to themselves. But, unfortunately for the rest of us, they often don't. And we will return very shortly with part 2.